Talking with Jeff Fagan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our Breakfast Bar series.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me.
What an interesting subject of government contracting. And you talked today to us about the bid protest process.
Sure.
And as I'm listening to you and you talk about the capability to protest prior to an award, post-award, the idea of stays, injunctive relief, how does anything get done?
Well, the government contracting process is highly regulated, as we discussed, and the bid protest process is sort of just one of the tools that a contractor can use to help facilitate getting the work that contractor wants. So when a solicitation is out on the street and the contractor decides to bid on it, the contractor doesn't get the award, one of the things to consider is whether or not that decision was a poor one by the government, and if the contractor decides from a business perspective that it makes sense to consider the protest process, there are several different mechanisms to employ and decision points to make in that process.
So this must be a very transparent, public, maybe that's the word I'm struggling for, a public process. Because if I apply for a government contract, I don't get it, I suppose I need to know what other individuals had submitted bids, right?
Correct.
To know who got one, to then be able to compare their bid to my bid to some extent.
Sure.
To understand whether or not there are bases for a protest. Is that accurate?
Well, so the big difference, one of the big differences between the private sector and the public sector is there's a much higher level of transparency. So there are requirements for release of materials. You get certain things pre-award, you get many more things post-award. So yes, you can see materials that have been submitted by other contractors in some fashion in the post-award process where you wouldn't have been privy to that in the pre-award process. Mm-hmm. There's also, of course, the Freedom of Information Act that you can always submit to the government to try to get materials that are not otherwise confidential. So there's a high degree of information out there. As we discussed also, there's the debriefing process after the decision to award has been made, and you can get a lot of information from the government in the debriefing process that you can then use to inform yourself for a potential bid protest.
And it sounds like taking advantage of that debriefing process is somewhat of a no-brainer, because if you don't take advantage of that, you're not going to get the specification of why your particular bid was not awarded. Is that right?
And I don't know of a contractor in any kind of high-level government contract situation that wouldn't take advantage of the debriefing process, even if you have no intention of protesting an award or decision to award. You always learn. So you put so much energy into a bid, so much time, so much staff time, resources, that why wouldn't you want to learn why you didn't get a contract if you can get that information directly from the government as to their decision-making process.
And whether or not to actually protest, it sounds to me like, if I oversimplify this, a tremendous exercise in judgment. And the judgment being things like, what are my chances of success? How badly do I want this? What's my relationship with the person from whom I want the bid? Because it sounds like within this government contracting industry, a person can develop a reputation for being somebody who maybe protests for grounds that aren't necessarily that strong.
Well, Linda, look at it like this. Essentially, what you're telling the government and the contracting officer for the government in a bid protest situation is you made a bad decision. And human nature is such that if you tell the same person many times that they made a bad decision, they're going to remember that you've often told them that you made a bad decision. So if your relationship with a particular agency and a particular contracting officer in his department or her department is important to you, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and you want to pull back and move along and maybe submit a better bid next time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us this morning about this. I really feel like I got an education, had no idea there were all these layers of process involved. And thank you for demystifying that for us today. And the other moral to the story, obviously, is there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of relationships, and having the right attorney to help you through the process is key.
Sure, thanks, happy to do it.
Thanks so much.
All right.